Welcome to Really Dicey. This is Manny,
And I'm Matt.
and today we're going to talk about Sons of Singularities Journal in the Gene. We're going to talk about our 5 favorite things that we love about these 2 books and these 2 massive books. Oof. So, Matt, I'm going to pass it to you first.
Oh, sure. The first thing I loved about this book was how well the mythos was worked in the historical setting. Now, there have been a lot of historical settings that Call of Cthulhu has been featured in, and they're all brilliant, but that doesn't mean that it isn't fantastic to see it done every time. So it's just great. This reminds me that some people have described the mythos as a cuckoo's egg, because it can just kind of invade any historical setting. And in keeping with the historical motto of Call of Cthulhu game, which is "it could always be worse," these books really present scenarios where the mythos is introduced to this really turbulent period of history, and in a way that just makes everything a little more horrific, but without cheapening any of the actual tragedies and difficulties of the actual historical period. It was very well done.
Volume 2 has a small section called the French Foreign Legion. It was just a couple of pages, but I was already overwhelmed with how much information they packed in about this.
Yeah, there was just a lot of information, a lot of historical information about the region. And first you get all the facts, the real world facts.
Yeah.
And then you see how the mythos has crept into that and how it's woven into the history. It's really very well done.
Yeah, I am. So the Call of Cthulhu books I've read, they give a great amount of history, but these 2 books, I felt that I learned a lot about it and more. It just gives you so much details, and I agree with you. It does a wonderful job of just seamlessly adding in the mythos and all these other strange things that they added. I love. Well, I don't want to go too far ahead, but yes, let me pass it back to you.
Yeah, well, the second thing I loved about these books is the inclusion of different player factions. So obviously there are a lot of different groups in the history of this region of the world, right? You have the French and the colonialists, and you have the native speakers, and the book encompasses the war, World War II, so you have Axis and Allies powers. It allows the book to have something that I've very rarely seen in a role-playing scenario, which is replayability. So you can actually play through a scenario, and then the book will present the same scenario from a different perspective. And so you can play through the scenario again. There's one scenario where you play through as French soldiers, and then the scenario is represented from the view of the Vietnamese soldiers, which is really amazing. I've never actually seen that in a role-playing product before. Replayability, that's great.
The adventures that have available, like I totally agree with you. The adventures they have here available I haven't seen a Call of Cthulhu used that way. There's one called Operation Grasscutter, and I'll do my best not to spoil it. But the players all have different agendas to the goal, and the way the game is set up, you kind of not only have to worry about the what the keeper has planned, but now you have to kind of worry about are these investigators on my side, and it gets really interesting. And I agree with you. It doesn't just take one viewpoint. Fate of Kaong by James Drouker. you look through the eyes of Vietnamese fishermen, and you're trying to survive this sea serpent, pretty much. Hopefully, that's not being too spoilery. But yeah, it's like Cthulhu's awakened just for a brief second, and it's just chaos everywhere. So you have to see everything through their eyes. But there's also the parchments of Tam, where you have to look through, like as a espionage to find out why there's political intrigue and there's other magical weirdness. Um, the La Roulette, your French forces, French foreign forces, escorting a caravan. So there's a lot of really interesting viewpoints to play, and of course, there's all of them have like pre-generated characters. So it's almost like you're jumping into a play.
Yeah, yeah, it's really well done, and they've really seen to everything to really immerse you there. A quick aside: one thing I liked about that fisherman story you were talking about, that brief moment when Cthulhu awakens, is actually the same brief moment from the Call of Cthulhu short story by Lovecraft. If you check the dates. So on one side of the world, you've got the story where he wakes up and the guy hits him with a boat and all that sort of stuff. And on the other side of the world, because it mentions in the story that Cthulhu's stirrings were felt around the world, and this is one of those instances, which I thought was really nice. A lovely little tie-in to not just the mythos, but the actual literature.
That is really awesome. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it doesn't. Another thing I like is it doesn't mention that. You have to actually. I was reading and I thought, wait, those dates. And I went back and checked it out, and there it is. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Some fun Easter eggs.
Yes, an Easter egg. So the third thing I really liked is the book. The scenarios are written in an open-ended way. They call it emergent narrative, which means it has no predetermined plots. There are events and there are places for the investigators to go to and people and for them to talk to, but it's really up to them to determine which way that they go. The books include lots of tools for the keepers to follow where the investigators lead, and I really enjoyed that.
Not only can you play each of the major adventures separately, there are so many adventure hooks.
So the fourth thing that I really liked was something pretty unusual. Not only do they have the replayability, but they have bits of the scenarios where the players act out flashbacks. So your investigators find some journals and they talk about some events that happened in the past. And instead of just presenting that information to the players, they actually suggest that your players set aside their regular investigators and place some new characters in an historical flashback. So it's kind of like a script. Like, okay, this is what happens, but they have the players play it out, which is really kind of neat. I haven't seen that very often.
There's one called La Roulette by Jason Sheets and Francis Aquaron, where there's some time jumps. There's a Christmas party in the past, and then there's the current horror that they're facing, and it kind of goes back and forth a bit. I thought that was fun. I love that each adventure is very different from one another, even the adventure hooks.
Yeah, you do get a lot of different adventures. You get some that are mostly investigation. You get, there's one that's just straight out military. It's just a straight out military operation that takes place at the end of World War II, and it involves the Japanese and a secret project and all sorts of mythos things that I won't want to give away. But yeah, so that's and quite quite possibly the end of the world. Maybe that should be your last last adventure, because there might not be any others. But there's an adventure that's really almost a mini campaign. It really can be stretched out. It involves a hike through a jungle, a hike, I should say, a death march of dwindling supplies and disease and madness, and a lost city and cults, Cthulhu madness. It's great. So lots of different ways to play the game, presented all in this one product. And the final thing that I loved about this product is the copious amount of player handouts and materials. There are just pages and pages of maps and newspapers and I think we mentioned the pre-generated characters, all come with bits of local knowledge and ways you can work them in, and lots of help, to help people who may not be familiar with this period in history in this part of the world to get immersed into the stories. They've done really everything they possibly could, short of including some plane tickets.
You're absolutely right. There's besides the pre-generated characters, there's a lot of information, and I see why they did it, because again, the time, place, and the setting probably not very familiar to most players of Call of Cthulhu. I mean, I'm uber impressed at how well they prepare the game for you, so that you don't feel overwhelmed by the setting and time period.
Yes, yes, it's always a little tricky when you get these historical settings, and they're a little possibly not as familiar to some of us. I'm always a little worried when I crack one of these open that it's going to be a textbook and I'm going to have to memorize all this stuff, and I'll never be able to I'll never be able to present it properly. But they really did a wonderful job of helping you understand what was going on and getting you involved. And I love the mix of native characters and foreign characters to the area. So your players can choose how comfortable they want to be. If they say, well, I know nothing about the setting, great. Play a character who knows nothing about the setting, and then you're all set.
Even though I don't know if this is connected to our fifth point, but the pacing of the adventures I thought was really good. It gives you like a introduction of what's happening, and then kind of like what's the story arc, and then it goes through each thing very carefully, giving you a little bit of history, giving you the adventure, and then of course your NPCs and stat blocks and things like that. Fantastic fantastic books.
Yes.
I am not sure yet if these books are like the hard copies are available in stores yet. I know those that back the Kickstarter have received it, and if you want your copy like right now, Drive to RPG has the PDFs. I'll put a link in the bottom or information in the bottom if the physical books are available and where to find them.
Okay, great. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.